So that was the first scene of The World Ends With You, the animation. And this is what introduces us to Shibuya, the world, and our main character, Neku. And I want to look at how throughout this first episode, the animation has kind of changed Neku's characterization from what it was in the game. And so, to start out this video, I want to compare this very first scene from the anime with the very first scene from the game.
Out of my face! You're blocking my view! Shut up! Stop talking! Just go the hell away. All the world needs is me. I got my values. So you can keep yours, alright? I don't get people. Never have, never will.
Now, don't get me wrong, I think that both approaches have their merits. The game gives you a good idea of Neku's headspace straight from the get-go, whereas the show cryptically sets up a mystery. The problem with this is that the show never really loops back to introduce us to this part of Neku. When it comes down to it, Neku doesn't really see the value of the people around him, or their thoughts and ideas if they differ from his own. Essentially, Neku is pretty egocentric when we meet him in the game, emphasizing his own needs, concerns, and outcomes rather than those of others. Essentially, he's someone whose primary concern is looking out for number one. Whereas our first impression of him in the show is a vague, blurry flashback, essentially, and then cutting to him in the middle of the Shibuya Scramble Crossing. It's more so focused on that idea that he's pretty freaked out that no one can see him and he can't touch people or cars or anything like that, kind of having that sensory overload because he can start hearing all of their thoughts. But then the story just kind of moves on. In the games, we're treated to a fairly consistent look at Neku's internal monologue throughout the course of the game, while this is completely absent from the anime, which as we move forward is focused far more on that hitting the highlights and the major battles and the major story beats, which don't get me wrong, it's definitely cool too. And I've thoroughly enjoyed seeing some of our favorite characters in action in the beautiful animation style that they've gone with. But one of the most defining aspects of The World Ends With You as a story is being able to bear witness to how Neku's thoughts and ideas within his inner world lead him to engage with the people around him and his environment. And this leads us to talking about his relationship with Shiki in this episode, and most notably their interaction in front of the Hachiko statue. So I can definitely understand the show having to pare down some elements from the games, especially within these first couple very tutorial-filled kind of days. And so all in all, I think that our introduction to Shiki and Neku's partnership was pretty satisfying and overall stayed true enough to the games without it being jarring. And while this first episode was pretty exposition heavy, with a lot of the exposition coming from Shiki this time around, instead of the other sources we kind of got it from in the actual game, seeing them interact was just, I don't know, it was enjoyable. With that said though, while they hit Shiki's general personality pretty well on the nose as far as introductions go, Neku, again, he just doesn't seem like himself. Let's break it down. In their first interaction, after they've teamed up and defeated the noise in front of the Hachiko statue, as they're talking, once Neku gets some information from Shiki that may be useful to him in the game, he just dips out without another word, then chastises her for following him. In Neku's mind, while people can be used as a means to an end in tight spots, he has no reason to trust or be weighed down by someone like Shiki, and only ends up agreeing to go to the 104 building with her because she's going to follow him anyways, so he might as well. In the anime, however, they just kind of pair up together and end end up going to the 104 building without any fuss, and they complete the day. And I would go even so far as to say that Neku is letting Shiki take the lead in the anime, and is simply putting his faith in her that she's right about needing to end up at the 104. Again, the game has much more internal kind of thoughts and feelings, and we just don't get that here. The story feels very railroaded. Then the next day, he sticks with her without any real second thoughts in the show as she informs him about the world they ended up in the Reaper's game. It just doesn't feel like the Neku that we've gotten to know so well in the game. And who knows, maybe the internal monologue is still there. Maybe he is having all of these same thoughts in the anime. But if they don't show us that, then how can we know? This thinning out of Neku's more avoidant and individualistic tendencies leaves us with a character who's simply a guy who doesn't know where he is, who he is, or why he's there. But, you know, like I said, adaptations do this from time to time, for good or for bad. They speed up events so that they can ruminate a little bit more, take a bit more time with those meaningful and character-defining moments. And so, at this point, I was still pretty unconcerned. Actually, I was stoked, because they'd gotten a lot of the exposition out of the way pretty quickly, and so now we could focus on some very important moments from day 2. And so once he and Shiki end up purging the noise from the Hachiko statue on day 2. With the added help of beat and rhyme in the anime adaptation, which, fair enough, Izuki comes down to chat with them, and I was ready. I was ready for things to go down. And well, they did, but the show did something that I thought was almost unforgivable. They completely butchered one of the best and most mind-boggling scenes from the game, just based on the fact that it happened so early on. Neku turning on Shiki. In the show, this is framed as Neku's intense negative emotions, which we haven't seen to any meaningful capacity. They just expect us to believe that they're there, have caused him to be taken over by the noise, which is fine. And so, when provoked by Izuki, this leads him to turn on Shiki in order to get released from the game. And this retcon, while serviceable to show just how dangerous the noise and the Reapers can be, and that they are capable of influencing the players in the Reapers game, which is honestly a pretty dope idea, it strips Neku of a distinct and interesting character flaw, which is his unwillingness to trust the people around him. And this is something that really highlights his journey and his character growth throughout the course of the game, and so taking this from him feels kind of wrong. Being possessed by the noise because he can't control his emotions is definitely a problem, but his attack on Shiki can easily be written off as having only occurred because of that possession, completely getting rid of the gravitas that this moment should have held. The game, however, sets this scene up in a much more interpersonally interesting and dynamic way. Izuki says that she'd free him from the Reaper's game if he participated in a bonus challenge, to which he immediately agrees without even waiting to hear what it is or what would happen if he failed. Still pretty similar to the anime, and Neku agreeing shows that he's a bit impulsive, but because we're able to see his thoughts and his inner monologue so consistently throughout the game, we see that he quite literally didn't even take a moment to think through this proposition. He just immediately agreed without thinking of any potentially negative implications of this deal. So when it's revealed that he has 1 minute to either kill Shiki or face erasure, he understandably struggles with this choice. We learn through his inner voice that he wants to be freed, but doesn't think that he has it in him to kill someone. This wasn't a hair-trigger decision to just turn on Shiki, and he was genuinely conflicted about what to do in that moment that he got himself into by not thinking about the implications of what agreeing with someone he doesn't know and genuinely can't trust has to say. And so when Izuki lies and tells him that Shiki was actually a Reaper spy, it's here that we see this internal monologue again go completely silent. Whether this is shock, rage, fear, or all of the above, It completely consumes him, which is a natural human response. This is striking because this intensely stressful situation forces Neku's confirmation bias to go into overdrive in this moment, which confirmation bias, if you're not familiar, is the tendency to interpret new evidence as confirmation of one's own existing beliefs or theories. Neku is likely scared for his own life, and so with such limited time, he connects dots that only really make sense at a very surface level because it supports this idea that Shiki, like everyone else, is untrustworthy. And so he turned on her immediately for the simple fact that she kept checking her phone, which had to mean that she was passing off info to the Reapers. There could be no other explanation, and if there was, he doesn't have time to think of it under this time constraint, even though this info came from probably the most untrustworthy source possible. He accepts it at face value as a way of justifying saving himself from a rock and a hard place. And so when push comes to shove, he makes the call to attack Shiki. This could be seen as Neku being evil or a terrible person, and I could see why someone might not be too keen on Neku at first glance. But when it comes down to it, he was in full survival mode and had to make a judgment call, and in turn, his impulsive decision to accept this easy out for the Reaper's game led him to having to choose self-preservation over another person's life. This isn't justification of his actions by any means, but more so acknowledging the sadistic Sophie's choice situation he was kind of placed in. This moment is such an amazing look at not only Neku's character, but also how human nature in these intensely stressful situations makes people make choices that don't quite make sense. This entire Reaper's game is playing with these kids, because they're kids' lives, and so they make the calls that they think that they need to. And so the fact that the show just kind of blows past it and dismisses it as a supernatural possession or occurrence just feels like a little bit of a betrayal of the source material to me. I don't know. Overall, I liked this first episode of the animation. I really did, even though this video might sound pretty negative. But with these changes to Neku, it's making me think that the experience and the impact of his arc runs the risk of being severely lessened to a very surface level story that just serves as a device for you to get the gist of what his character is and what this story is supposed to be without actually hitting the depth it's meant to. I wish the anime had gone more in depth than it actually did in regards to Neku's conversation with Mr. Sane. Whether they retconned it to be in the third day or made it flashbacks like in the game to the second day after the incident with Shiki. And in that conversation, this is when it's expressed that Neku needs to trust Shiki, whether he likes it or not, if he wants to come out of the Reaper's game alive. Because when it comes down to it, really, she's the only one he can rely on. And in the third day, he begrudgingly does. We should have seen how down to the wire the third day's challenge was, and how without Beat and Ryan being the ones who actually completed the challenge, they definitely would have failed, whereas in the anime, they kind of breezed through it. I can appreciate the fact that, let's be honest, this anime is just a big commercial for the game and its upcoming sequel, so that we can kind of be familiar with the characters and get excited for which ones are returning and which ones aren't, and so that new fans of the franchise can kind of get hooked. But I just feel as though they're leaning too hard into these action set pieces, when the appeal of the games for a lot of people was never the combat, however unique and interesting it might be. It's the characters like Neku and Shiki that made the game so phenomenal. I am very worried that this poor setup of our protagonist will carry through the entirety of the anime and maybe give people not high enough of an opinion of just how fantastically written The World Ends With You is. But that'll do it for today's video, guys, and I want to pass the question off to you. What are your thoughts about The World Ends With You, the animation so far? Am I blowing all of this out of proportion, do you think I'm going to eat my words about Neku's characterization by the end of the show? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, why not liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and why not even ringing that notification bell so you never miss another upload? And if you're not familiar, we have merch on our Teespring page. We have our Hanakatoba design, that's Fruits Basket inspired, and our Crow design, which is much more Persona inspired. So if either of those interest you, the link for that will be in the description down below. And as always, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, a fantastic rest of your week, and why not even a fantastic rest of your month. And I will see you in the next video. Later.